Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. Welcome to our first ever live episode. It's only been in our name for the past 2 years, but hey, we finally got around to it. I'm Ken Coughlin, and as usual, I am joined today by
Ben Lander.
Hello, Ben Lander.
Hello, Ken Coughlin.
So obviously, as you can tell, we are socially distancing each other. Ben is at his home studio. Mary Kay and I are here at ours. This is an experiment, which Ben doesn't know this because he's not watching the actual stream. We've already failed. Ben, you didn't see this, but people who were tuning in from the beginning, apparently I started the live stream a little too early, and they would have seen me talking to you before the screen went black, before the intro came up. So, sorry. Maybe I'll edit that out later. We'll see. The other thing I will let everybody know who's at home watching us is that you'll see me with the headphones. That's because I need these in order to hear Ben. He doesn't need them to hear me. But my audio that I'm hearing and Mary Kay's hearing through our headphones is a split second delayed from what we're actually saying. So I can hear my voice in real environment and also through the headphones, and it's going to give me a headache. But if at any point I start to hesitate or stutter or anything like that, it's probably because of this delay is just messing with me. So when Ben's talking, I'll try to keep my mouth shut so it doesn't mess with me anymore there. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us for our very first live episode of Trinity Talk Live. Because this is a live episode, you can comment in the live chat here on YouTube, and our illustrious producer, Mary Kay, who is off to my left, will chime in, and she'll read us any comments that are appropriately written and let us know we can answer them live on air. If you don't want to comment, you don't have to. But hey, it's live, so why not? But primarily what we're going to be talking about today, at least until you guys throw some curveballs at us in the comment section, is the coronavirus, COVID-19. And because this is a Christian program, we want to talk primarily about how to be the church in this era of a pandemic. And I'm actually going to turn things over to Ben because you've been sending me a lot of different articles. And by the way, if you see me looking off to the side, that's because from my perspective, Ben's over here, whereas you all, the audience, are over here. So I'm probably looking back and forth periodically because I just instinctively make eye contact with the person I'm talking to. So I kind of want to start out with just an overview, Ben, as far as, because we went back and forth. You sent a lot of articles. I know Andrew Kassouf, if he's watching now or later, he sent us some suggestions. There's a lot more involved in the issue of being the church during a pandemic than just live streaming worship services. But maybe talk about some of the issues that we've come up with, and maybe we can just jump off on whatever you want to start off with.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, Ken and I were kind of discussing what we were going to talk about today, and the big thing is, of course, that which is affecting all of us, that which must not be named, that is the coronavirus. We understand, some people at this point in the quarantine are maybe tired of hearing about it. But, the whole point of this show, especially as a water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective, is to look at world events, which this is pretty much what's happening in the world right now. And we look at it from a Christian perspective, how we should respond as Christians. And so, I sent Ken, actually, Andrew, thank you if you're watching. You sent us a couple of really good articles, and that led me down this kind of rabbit hole of some other articles that we found. And just how churches are responding, I think overwhelmingly it's been a positive response. Everyone's been, because we're all in the same boat, everybody has been understanding, at least at Trinity here. We've had we are blessed with such a great and supportive congregation. They've been tuning in to our live streams that we've been doing on Sundays and Wednesdays, and our worship concerts on Fridays. And we'll get into that, like how we as Trinity are kind of tackling this and how what we've seen other churches doing. Um, but the big thing right now, I guess, I want to address is, first of all, um, the reason why, maybe some people are tired of hearing about this, because there's a lot of emotional energy that goes into this, because we're all preoccupied with what's going on, and that's draining. That's valid. And so we don't want to dismiss that. We don't want to dismiss how anybody's feeling about this. And so the number one thing that we can do to, as a church, as church leadership, that we can encourage you by in the midst of all this is to take heart, not to worry, because it seems like fear and anxiety kind of are spreading faster than the disease itself, right? Everybody hears these numbers which change on a daily basis, and everything's changed on a daily basis. Our routines are changed. There's a lack of certainty with when we will be returning to a sense of normalcy. And so that causes a lot of anxiety. But as people of God, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and wisdom and might. And so we want to encourage you, those who are listening, those who are believers, who have faith in Christ, as he told us in Matthew chapter 6. We'll start off there. I just want to read to you a little bit from Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 25. These are the words of Jesus.
He says, "Therefore, this was coming. I could put this on the screen, but just saying."
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Curveball. So Matthew chapter 6, verse 25 says this, 25 and following. Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and gone tomorrow, is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? What shall we wipe with? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own."
Yeah, now you got me wondering, picturing what people wiped with in the first century. Thanks for that.
The flowers of the field, maybe. I don't know. The point being that God has told us over and over again in his word that we should not worry, because he is still sovereign. He's still in control, even in the midst of this pandemic. And so that's going to color kind of our conversation here, because we're going to share maybe some things, or maybe you've been hearing things on the news that are kind of troubling. But the bottom line is to hold on to faith, because your faith, how big your God is. I think I heard Tony Evans say this recently. Something to the effect of how big your God is directly proportional to how much faith you have. So when you shrink God, then your faith shrinks as well. So we have to remember that we serve a mighty God who is all powerful, and this didn't take him by surprise. Nothing takes him by surprise. So we can go to him, and that's the best thing that we can do, is to pray and continue to lift each other up.
Yeah, and I think that's the framework. Everything else falls under that. In other words, there's a whole bunch of issues we could talk about how to be the church in the time of a pandemic, but we have to make sure that we're approaching all of those from the mindset of knowing that God's in control, that God's got this, that this didn't surprise him at all. And so we shouldn't be approaching this from a perspective of panic or freaking out, but from one of, okay, knowing that God's into control, how do we shift in order to best serve him, in order to best allow the word or get the word into the ears of our congregants, in order to serve the people in need, to do everything that seems to be honest, people, a lot of what the church does, people are hesitant. I just gave a sermon on last Wednesday about evangelizing, and we talked about overcoming your hesitancy, overcoming some of the concerns, the fears that people have with actually talking to people. And I think that now we're faced in a situation where we're all being told to hole up in our homes. People could use that even more as an excuse to not get out and evangelize and spread the good word. And so we really need to be focusing on how do we go about accomplishing the things we should have been doing before, but under this new environment, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if there's one thing, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think if there's one thing that we really can see as a positive from this, if you want to say that, is it's kind of forced churches, especially, to rethink how we've always done things. And so, those churches who, little prime example, we've partnered with St. Matthew's. St. Matthew's has not really had the opportunity to live stream before, but now they're kind of getting their feet into that. Trinity, we're grateful that we had this kind of groundwork already laid, but there's still ways that we're still finding out that we can do things differently and better, even in the midst of social distancing. Because even when all this goes away, we're still not with each other 24/7, so we still want to be the church and be connecting not only with each other, but checking in on our neighbors and being a light of hope. Prime example, I hear me when I say this. I'm not saying this to toot my own horn or anything. Just kind of my life and how I'm viewing this. But I was at the hospital 2 weeks ago with somebody who was they were removing him from life support, but while I was waiting for the family, I was going to meet with them. And while I was waiting for the family, no less than two strangers approached me, and we got to talking, and both asked if they could pray with me. And, so that tells you, A, that people are looking for answers in this time. There's this general sense of anxiety, this general sense of fear about all this. It goes back to what I was saying, the fear is spreading faster than the disease itself. And the world is looking for answers. And so I think that really shows us that the harvest is ready, but the workers are few, and so we have something to offer. That thing is hope. And, all the more why we should be in any means that we have, if it's praying with somebody, if it's praying for somebody, if it's checking in on your neighbor, we have that on our website, the neighbor check-in. Any way that you can be a light, be the light of Christ, to spread hope and speak against the fear and tell people, why we have the hope that we have. I know that's your favorite verse, Ken. Exactly. Always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have. Now more than ever.
You're stealing my hope line. I mentioned all of this in my Wednesday night sermon about the fact that the world, more than anything, is looking for hope. And we have hope to give. If that doesn't inspire you to get out there and tell people about the gospel, what will?
Right. Exactly. That was a great message, by the way. And so that's
thank
why.
You. Not to toot my own horn. No, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Stole from it.
So I guess here we've kind of talked about the issue broadly, but why don't we try tackling some of the specific issues that arise with this attempt to be the church in the time of this pandemic? And again, as a reminder for anybody that's just joining us, if you do have any questions, comments, put them in the live chat and we can respond to you right here on the air. It's a beautiful thing about this actually being a live episode of Trinity Talk Live. But as far as the specific issues are concerned, I think we should start with probably the most obvious one, and that is worship services. I know when the closures were first coming down, especially when it was initially just you couldn't have gatherings over a certain number of people before non-essential businesses were closed. There was a big debate going through the Christian community about whether or not we should cancel church services. And I did see a difference of opinion, I guess, but mostly a lot of people saying, well, don't blame or come down too hard on people who think either way on the issue, because obviously there is worship is something that's very important and it's very significant. But I like what you were saying, Ben, that one thing that this pandemic, if we were to try to take a positive out of it, is that it has forced us to rethink the way we do things and to rethink about what's really important. Pastor Jay gave a great message about purpose and about focusing on what the real purpose is. And a lot of what we do, even in worship, we can still do, and we can think of ways, unique ways to do that. And so I will tell you that as much as I do believe that, especially when we were going through all that, we shouldn't come down too hard on people who wanted to gather versus those who didn't. I did have my own personal viewpoint on it, and I kind of agree with what we did here at Trinity, and that was we shouldn't have been gathering. And the reason I come down on that is that we are to love our neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that is as important as worship is. We are not showing love to our neighbor as much if we are doing something that could potentially endanger them. And that's the perspective I look at. Now I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, Ben. I think we're getting some kind of interference from my voice coming through your speaker, like little feedback. Can you turn down your speakers a little bit and still be able to hear me?
Sure.
Yeah, because whenever I'm talking, I'm noticing something coming in through the headphones, and so I just want
Is
to
that
make
better?
sure that sounds better there. So I think we're
Okay.
good. Anyway, so gathering or not gathering for worship services, your thoughts go.
Yeah, so actually that leads us to one of the articles, I think. But yeah, I like what you're saying. To be the church, to be loving our neighbors, to be looking out for one another's needs is more than just gathering for worship, right? And again, that's one of the things that the pandemic has kind of taught us or reminded us of, I guess I should say, is that the church is not the building, the church is the people, and so wherever two or more are gathered, Christ promises to be there among us. And so we can gather online and we have the technology to do that, and we're grateful for that. Um, I kind of agree with all, like you were saying, the decision that we made at Trinity to not gather. It kind of leads me to one of the articles that I had seen and we were looking at. There's a church in Florida just this past Sunday that was packed with worshipers. It says, Florida church packed with worshipers, pastor shuns social distancing. So it talks about this mega church in Florida that the pastor of, Pastor Rodney Howard Brown, has basically said, we're going to stay open as long as we possibly can, kind of shunning those other churches that are closing. I think at one point it even says that he refers to people who have closed their doors as pansies, things like that. Yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
coming down harsh. And, so I guess I'll kick it back to you, Ken. How do you think we should respond to somebody who's, based on what you've said, with loving our neighbors, and sometimes the loving thing to do is to prevent them from possibly contracting this, versus what this pastor seems to be saying of if we're doing that, then it really shows a lack of faith. How do we reconcile that?
No, it doesn't show lack of faith at all. First of all, I do want to mention that Andrew Kasuf is watching us live because he has indicated to us that we did fix the audio issue with you turning down your speakers. So excellent. Thank you, Andrew, for letting us know.
Awesome.
No, here's the problem. I think in a lot of churches today, we lose focus on the fact that of the church universal. The church is not an individual building. The church is not an individual congregation. And we almost act like we're businesses in competition with one another.
Mm.
And and so it's like, well, I want my church to gather because otherwise we're not worshiping. We have technology, whether any individual church has the possibility of doing this or not. The church universal has the ability to bring the worship services into your home. And so even if your church doesn't, then the question is, okay, but you could explore those that do, and you could refer your congregants to those locations online, and they could participate in worship that way. And so you weigh that against the risk that you are presenting to the community if you continue to gather. And understand, it's not just a risk to your congregants. It's that if your congregants get it and they go out to the grocery store and now they pass it on to the cashier of the grocery store and then they pass it on to someone else, the horrifying thing about this particular virus is that you can have it and be a carrier and not be having any symptoms. And so you can
Right.
be passing it and not even realize you're passing it. And I still think we're getting the interference on the audio again. I don't know if you could turn it down even more. We could try that. Um, so I do disagree with pastors who will criticize people who decided not to gather anymore. I think that you're you're looking at the importance of worship, and worship is important, but we can still do that. It might not feel the same as it always did, but we can still worship as a unified body of Christ. Whereas if you do gather, no matter how many safety precautions you take, you get that many people in close proximity, you are definitely increasing the risk of spreading a disease out into the community, and that's not what we should be doing as Christians. That's my viewpoint on it. So, you gonna tell me you disagree with me?
No, I do agree with you. Actually, thank you, Andrew. He just sent me a text that I might want to mute my mic when I'm not speaking. That might help the feedback issue. So I'll try that. But
Right.
now that I am speaking, I got to unmute it. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think you're right. We lose sight of, and I like what you said about, sometimes churches view each other as competition rather than, we're all in the same kingdom. There are no denominations in heaven, and we lose sight of that here in our earthly, fleshly selves. Yeah, another positive, if you want to take from this, is that it kind of does force us to be a little bit more ecumenical, a little bit more, reaching out to be the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. It's not seek first the Lutheran Church, seek first the Presbyterian Church, seek first the Methodist or the Baptist, whatever your particular denomination is. Not that we're trying to minimize any kind of the specific doctrines of those congregations or your specific beliefs, but this is not a time to focus on things that divide us. It's a time to focus on what unites us, and that's the blood of Jesus Christ. That's Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And because that sends a message to the world, how Christians are responding. Because actually, this same pastor who I just referenced, the one in the Florida megachurch, Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne, was also referenced in an article on the New York Times, and it has a disturbing title. It says, "The religious right's hostility to science is crippling our coronavirus response." Basically the New York Times.
I don't know if you saw this or not. I don't know if you follow Act 17 Apologetics, our YouTube channel, but he just put out a video on that same article. That wasn't even the original headline. They changed it. Oh, what was the original one? It was extremely inflammatory. Something along the lines of evangelical Christians paving the way to coronavirus hell. Something like that was what the original headline was. So, yeah, it was even more inflammatory than that. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think I had seen that as well. It's like the road to coronavirus hell was paved with evangelical something,
Yeah, something like
by evangelicals. So it's very inflammatory. And but they specifically call out this pastor, Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne, and essentially saying it's dangerous to shun. Now again, that kind of lumps all evangelicals together. They do say later on in this article that not every evangelical. It's calling it more so ultra conservative, right wing, whatever. They tend to associate political parties, and again they go after Trump as well and his baseline of evangelical supporters. But basically, this is how the world is seeing, just kind of lumping evangelicals together when you see churches who are refusing to submit to the authorities that are that govern over us. And that's again, I don't think that's biblical. That's clearly the scripture tells us that all authority, there is no authority that exists except that which is established by God. And so we should submit except where it goes against our faith. I don't think something like this is necessarily endangering our faith. I get the point of wanting to worship together, but there are options that we still have. And so, I think, you have, like you said, we have to remember that we are a universal church. We are a church united, and so we focus on what unites us. And when we have outliers that are going against that, that kind of sends a message, the wrong message, I think, to the world.
Okay, we have a comment from Andrew, and I apologize for that lack of switching, but I was trying to find the article for you.
Oh, what, was I on the screen while he was talking?
Yeah, for a little bit.
I didn't pick my nose, man.
I missed the switch. But Andrew says, I think we have a responsibility to be reflectors of God's light in the world. We have a responsibility to love our neighbors. Closing makes sense. The church does not always do the best job of extending Christ's love. We are too often viewed as judgmental.
Yeah, and that illustrates a point that I was going to make, Andrew, is that we have to be cognizant of what message we're communicating to the world. And yes, worship is important. I get that. But when you endanger the community as a whole, are you harming the gospel message? Are people going to be looking at what you're doing as ambassadors of Christ and hold that against Jesus? Are you making someone less likely to be open to the gospel message when they have a negative impression of Christians because they think, oh, Christians are the ones that were still endangering us all during this coronavirus epidemic? So that's another concern that I think we need to take into account.
We have another comment. This is from Jennifer Boehm. She's saying, Trinity folks are doing a great job. We, Bruce and I, are glad you are bringing worship into our home with each live stream. And she says thank you and that they're praying and stay safe.
Mute your mic, Ben.
And Andrew is saying the Florida pastor is being reckless with the call of the universal church to advance the kingdom.
Yeah. I think where we're going to have, we learn lessons both in how to be the church in times of this pandemic and in how to live stream here remotely. Ben, do you have a set of, not for today, but for like next week, a set of earbuds or headphones or something? I think we might need to put some on you too. That way my audio is not coming through your speakers, it's coming through your headphones. So, sorry, you're going to have to look. Pastor Jay says I look like a TIE fighter pilot when I got these on camera. So sorry, you get to look the same. All right, well, what I want to do, are you going to chime in?
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry. Andrew says our faith is that Christ holds us in his hands and is walking through the issue with us.
Absolutely. And that's what we were talking about at the beginning, is that we need to approach whatever we do on this issue from the perspective of God's in control. God's got this. Let me shift focus a little bit from the general question or the more obvious question about gathering and worship services to the more boots on the ground question of service and being the church to our surrounding community in times when we have to be 6 feet apart from everybody. And I know we're doing some really interesting things there at Trinity. We may have some people watching here that aren't from Trinity, or even some that are, that might not be aware of everything that we're doing. So, Ben, because you've kind of been spearheading those efforts, or a lot of those efforts, why don't you go ahead and tell some people your thoughts about how do we continue to be the church, not just in worship, but in being the hands of Christ to those in need in a time like this when we're supposed to be socially distancing?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways. So speaking of Trinity specifically, I can speak to what we've been doing, but I've been seeing things all over the place that are really unique. I I saw a couple churches that gathered in their vehicles outside of a hospital. So as the shift changed, they were just blasting worship music, and people were worshiping from their cars. Still being 6 feet apart from each other. But that was pretty cool. Just kind of having worship music just out in public there, kind of still spreading hope, I guess. One thing that we've kind of done is on our website, we've got a little card that says neighbor check-in, kind of based on, when Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God, but the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. So it really kind of challenges us. It says, the idea is to fill that out, put your name and your contact info, and distribute those to your neighbor. And on it, it says if there's any point during this crisis that you need any help, such as gathering groceries or even pharmaceuticals, if we can help with that, or just anything, or even an emergency, please contact us. So it kind of puts the responsibility on us that if somebody does reach out, to be ready and willing to do that, to follow through. But I think it shows also at the same time a legitimate concern where there's no strings attached. Now, of course, at the bottom, we do have a link for our live streams, but that's not a quid pro quo kind of thing. We're just saying if you're looking for hope in this time, we also offer this. So it's kind of, again, just offering their, hey, no strings attached. We're just trying to be the hands and feet of Christ. So I think that's a good way that we've kind of decided to kind of combat this. Another thing that we're still doing is that our food closet is still open. And Mary Kay, you can kind of talk more to this than I could, but because you guys have been there in the thick of it, as people are still coming. We've seen an increase in need, I believe, as you were saying, and so people are coming to us, and we are still open. And we've changed the way that we've done some things with the food closet to kind of still provide that barrier of social distance. But we still are gathering donations and giving to people, especially as we see the increase in need for food, kids in schools who aren't getting meals, things like that. There's one other thing that is kind of forthcoming that I've been looking into. There's a pretty cool website that I've been looking into. It's called Bless Every Home, and it can kind of feel Big Brotherish, but when you sign up for it, you put your address in there, and it shows you the names of all your neighbors, at least if they're listed nobody uses Yellow Pages anymore, but whatever the phone book kind of equivalent, the web book, I don't know, would be. But it's cool because you put your contact info in there, and then it shows you your neighbors that you can pray for. If you're using that in conjunction with our neighbor check-in, you can make notes and say, hey, I delivered a neighbor check-in to this person. You can make notes of, hey, they contacted me about this. So ways that you're making touch points of, again, just being hope, being the light of Christ, spreading the gospel through our actions. Really, even though our action it may be limited at this time, to gather, we still have plenty of options to be hope.
Yeah, and you mentioned the food closet, and that's another example of what you were saying earlier, that this has forced us to rethink the way we do things. And for example, the food closet, I'm not going to go into all the specifics about how it works, but it used to be a ministry where we have our own building in the back of the parking lot, and the clients would come into the lobby area and they check into the desk and all this. Well, in order to maintain social distancing, you can't have a whole bunch of people crammed into a small lobby. And so it's almost like a drive-through service now. If you ever gone through a drive-through at a fast food joint and they didn't have your food ready when you got to the window, they always have those numbered parking spaces where they say, well, could you go park in space number 1 or space number 2? That's kind of how Mary Kay and her volunteers are doing the food closet now, where they have, numbered spots, all of which are more than 6 feet apart from each other. And people kind of come up they talk to someone just like you would talk to someone in a drive-through window from 6 feet away, and they get all the information that they need, and the person parks in a spot, and then someone comes out from the food closet building with the food, and they put it in the trunk of the car. Now I will mention to people, just as a matter of fact, both of us as Christians and everybody out there, try to be courteous of others, and sometimes that does mean trying to overcome their natural instincts. when I've been volunteering at the food closet, 2 of the days that I was out there this past week, my job was the one that was taking the food from the building out to the people's cars. And I know my lovely wife here, and I don't know who was the one that told them to stay in the car. Was it you?
Heidi and I both. Heidi's been doing the paperwork. I've been sort of greeting people and telling them how food pantry works, because for a lot of them, this is the first time they've ever come to one. And trying to also indicate how they can check in and know what's going on with us, because now the church offices are closed. There's not necessarily a human being to answer the phone and say, yes, our food closet is open, and it's open this time, and this is what you need to bring with you. So, we've had to overcome that too.
But I know you've been telling people to, stay in the cars. And again, I don't fault people. I understand. I'm the same way. A lot of them when they park, they'll open up their trunk, and then I come out with the food, and they come out of their vehicle and say, hey, can I help you? And
because they're so thankful for getting the food that they really want to not be waited on.
I know, and I get that. And that's what I mean by sometimes dealing with an issue like this does require us to kind of overcome what our natural inclinations are. Because obviously the safest thing to do is stay in your vehicle. I know how you feel. I'd be the same way. I want to get out and help people, but let me put it in your car for you. Because that's both, protecting both you and us. So we don't spread around like that. But that's just one example of things that we can do to try to rethink connecting with people. And one thing I talked about in the message I gave on Wednesday was, well, how do you evangelize and share the gospel in this time when you can't be talking to people? And one thing that I mentioned is, obviously we are still everybody's on social media right now because people aren't going out and seeing each other face to face, so they're all flocking to Facebook. So there certainly are opportunities there. Now, sometimes evangelizing and sharing the gospel on social media is a little bit more challenging because, especially if it's in a group and you don't know who you're talking to, people will say things behind the anonymity of a keyboard that they might not say to you in person. They might not be as polite. They might not be as open. And I get that. But there are certainly opportunities to share your story, and there are opportunities to share all these other resources that are out there. The passage that I was preaching on was from Philippians, every tongue confess. And we talked a little bit about what does that mean to confess Jesus as Lord, and how do you do that in a time of social distancing? Well, one thing I talked about is, are you sharing, if your church is showing live streams, do people know that you're watching them? Are you sharing that with people? We've got, again, like we talked about at the beginning, there are people that are looking for hope. We have hope to give. So there are things you could do like that. Just put things out there, invite people. We haven't done this as Trinity, but it's occurred to me as something we could do, Ben, is setting up our worship services as actually Facebook events that people can actually invite others to, and we can have the link to the live stream right there in the event. And that would give people the opportunity to not just post on their own wall, but actually to click on invite and send notifications to their Facebook friends to say, hey, if you're looking for hope, here's an opportunity that you can do it. That's just nothing else that occurs to me. Anything else as far as how to serve others in this pandemic time?
I think that's a good idea, Ken, about the making it a Facebook event. That's definitely something we could do. But other ways, so like you're saying, the gospel is the gospel. The good thing about it is that it's the word, and the word that's alive, and the word doesn't need to be face to face in order for it to be effective. It's no less efficacious for it, to be heard through YouTube or through, whatever your preferred method of live stream is. No less effective if you hear it over the phone. So that's another way to kind of be hope to people. If there's people that that are especially, one of the things we've been doing as a Trinity staff is trying to be intentional about calling people in our congregation, just checking in on them. See how they're doing, because like we said, kind of at the beginning of this, there's this whole spirit of fear and anxiety. We want to be making sure that we are checking in and seeing how people are doing. And there are some, I've come across that, in my conversations, they really don't have anybody. They live by themselves. And so this social distancing is really kind of hitting them harder because their main interaction is at church or at work. And when you take those two things away, then they're just left by themselves in the house. And so any kind of phone call that they get, especially older folks, that's kind of those who are already shut in, that's kind of already their reality. But if you have parents or grandparents in nursing homes, or just reach out and call. Start with your own family. Reach out and call them and say, just want to check in, see how you're doing. Haven't talked in a while. Sometimes what people need more is just a listening ear, or somebody to know that somebody cares about them. Because people, again, it's that old saying: people aren't going to care what you know until they know that you care. And so that's kind of the bottom line: is just care for people. Love them like Jesus would.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any new comments, so I'm going to, unless you have anything else you want to add, we can wrap this up. I will say that I love the fact that we are live streaming this, because normally when we film it, as soon as we're done filming it, I got to go back and edit the whole thing together. Well, the beautiful thing about live streaming is my wife here is operating the video switcher next to me.
And doing a poor job.
It's first time around. First time. We're learning. But it's already edited. It's done. So I don't have to do all that. So that makes me very happy. I'm going to have time to do something else this afternoon. So just a reminder, we did this time slot, Mondays at noon, is typically when we used to film it, even though it would air on Tuesdays at noon. Tuesdays at noon, at least while this is all going on, is not going to be a good time for us to live stream it because, we've got meetings all day on Tuesday, lots of times. We've got deliveries coming into the food closet on Tuesday. And so I think for at least the time being, we are going to be live streaming this on Mondays at noon. I'm going to ask Ben something on the air. I didn't ask him this ahead of time. I should have. How you doing, Ben? You ready for a curveball? All right.
Sure, why not?
During the course of the closure, I know we usually do the show every other week. How do you feel about doing it every week during the closure?
I think that's fine. Yeah, I'd be up for that.
No pressure. Just people are watching if you say no. So, no,
just send us your comments if there's anything you'd like us to talk about,
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is that whether it be in the live stream comments, or you can shoot us an email, or on the Facebook post, you can comment on that and let us know what topics you want to talk about. Especially if we're going to be doing this every week. We don't want to be doing a coronavirus episode every week. That's going to get kind of old, and people aren't going to want to be hearing about that. Although I know that the mass media, that's pretty much what's dominating the story. There's more to life than this, and we certainly want to be able to play a role in bring that message to people. So let us know what you want us to talk about. We can certainly work that into the episodes. Otherwise, we will be back next Monday at 12 noon. You can watch it live. You can watch it later, but we hope you'll be able to watch it live. Thank you very much, Ben. You switched to Ben one time so people can say bye to Ben. Say bye, Ben.
Bye, Ben. Bye, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Ken.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, Mary Kay. And thank you all for watching. God bless.